Hi, everyone, and welcome to another week of our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, with Shradha and I, where we discuss our passion topics. Hi, Shradha, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well today, and it's almost summer, and I like that.
It's summer in London, I can tell you that right now.
Is it
Our
sunshine?
our 1 week of summer. Yeah.
Well, soak it all in. Soak it all in.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
Of course, I think the sun is shining brightly more because we have an amazing guest today on our podcast, Michael Griffiths. Welcome to the episode of our Unpacking Organizations. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. So, for our listeners, Michael is a partner at Deloitte. He runs the organ change practice there, and he was one of the pioneers who started the skills based organization work at Deloitte. So, we're very excited to learn more from him and dive deeper into his pearls of wisdom. But before we get there, Michael, why don't you tell us something about yourself, about how did you get into the world of consulting and the world of skills, organization, change, job architecture? It's a world that people usually shy away from. So, how did you get passionate about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I must admit, Rupert, I feel like I need to get my money back because I moved from the UK to the US and it's raining here and it's sunny in England. That wasn't the deal I just signed up for when I moved to New York, to be honest with you. But
99% of the time, you're going to be winning that.
It has been
true,
extremely
true.
Not
rainy
today.
week, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much for welcoming me to the show. Yeah, my background is obviously growing up in England, as you can tell by the accent. I was a teacher straight out of college. Education was my sort of rite of passage. All my family were educators, but I moved sort of through that into sort of corporate world and enjoyed thinking more broadly about the whole human, not just the development part of it, and helping sort of consulting leaders around how to get the best out of their people. I did that at a QVC, a shopping channel in London. It was kind of startup at the time, and then brought that experience when I moved to the US to work for Accenture in their consulting, talent and organization performance practice. And then I've been at Deloitte for 10 years, playing various roles between learning, culture, leadership, and now I do the organ change practice. The thing that keeps me passionate about it, to your question, is I really believe more and more that even in this world of technology and robotics, the human actually is the most important part of it, it's always changing. So that's what keeps me passionate about it, Shredder.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. So, one thing that we were chatted about right before this was that you were the pioneer who brought in skill-based organization in Deloitte, and we are talking about skills-based organization for almost a decade now in the corporate world. And I personally feel being in those tables and discussing those and trying to implement those, that many of the pioneer organizations are still scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And so, what is it? What exactly? We all know what a skill based organization is and should be, but why are we not making as much progress as we could have? Because we are talking about it for almost a decade.
Yeah, it is a fascinating question. And, as you say, almost like a decade ago, I remember whiteboarding the idea of an org and all the talent processes with some colleagues at Deloitte, and the opportunity is very, very large in terms of being able to talent mobility, understanding your workforce, unlocking new capabilities of talent within your workforce. They're very, very big. Honestly, all the research we've done over the years, it's really legacy mindset that has stopped people really being able to move. Not really technology. It, but I'll say there's a bit of a change in the last couple of years. But traditionally, it's been a legacy mindset, moving through processes differently. Compensation is the best one, and rewards. It's very hard. People just can't get over the fact I need a year end, right? And so it's a very much that process. What I will say is that AI is a little bit of an unlock right now for skills based org. The ability to actually use passive data to understand skills and then use that data to actually drive it into performance or talent or even talent processes, it's a little bit of an unlock. So I think that's why it's a bit more on the table, to your point right now, is because organizations are saying we struggled, but maybe we can do better now.
I love that. I love that. And do you think that there is also a tension between AI now inflating the skills as well, right? And then there is a assessment of skills. And
Yeah.
so how are you dealing with those tensions? Because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it really comes down to your risk tolerance and again your organization structure. So and pace, right? I think the risk tolerance really comes to how much accuracy do you really need in that skills assessment process to be able to deploy talent, to be able to make decisions, to be able to drive the organization forward. Organizations that frankly are winning and moving quicker are a little bit more flexible in their risk tolerance. And that's really important in today's world. And we are much more stringent about the skills of our people than we are the actual technology of, say, Gen AI, for example. We just throw that into the workforce and let people play with it. We don't do that with our people, which is fascinating to me. But that's where it's interesting how the world is going.
And in terms of that legacy mindset, I mean, one of the things that I have observed a lot is that people are really stuck in their reward processes, compensation processes, and so at year end, as you say, it's more about performance and what justifying your bonus and salary increase and promotion rather than talent development. And so if you're talking
Yeah.
about skills, you're talking about
Yeah.
development. And if those two things become conflated together, you're at a sort of an impasse. And so, how are you trying to deal with that and unlock that and change that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it comes down to culture with performance. I found this more and more with organizations. I've talked to a few CHROs and other talent leads recently, um, and what they're finding is that really performance is actually a cultural need more than it is actually a rewards need. And obviously, you've got to figure out how to reward people, and I'm not saying that that's off the table, but the processes for performance are leading much more into culture and what I mean by that is really feedback and ability to actually have an organization that can move at the pace of needs right now by getting people to know what they're doing wrong and right at real time pace. So and that feeding into something in the end of the year that gives them or continuously through the year that gets them some sense of where they are. So it's interesting. I think the performance space right now is really moving to sort of what I would call human performance and learning. Like it's really around how do I understand the performance? How do I educate and develop, to your point, and make that more of a connection than it is to performance and rewards.
Yeah. And I think in a ideal world, one day we would be able to reward people based on their skills as well. But I think we are decades away from that, in my humble opinion. But that is the North Star that the skill based organization is going towards. And
True.
hopefully one day we will get there, but we don't know
I,
how at this
I,
point of time
I
because we
guess
are
the big
so
challenge is
much, yeah.
assessing. How do you assess
Yes,
objectively?
exactly. Right.
Because and most people don't even do self-assessment, and manage if the manager doesn't have the skill, how do they
Yes.
assess? And then to do third-party assessment is really difficult, and then that's also not complete either. I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on that, Michael, in terms of the assessment?
I do agree with that, and it
Um,
goes back to sort of the feeling of uh, you know, as I said, risk tolerance and ability to be comfortable with how assessments work. I think to shift the gears slightly, which I think is so connected to this that we're seeing, um, it's really around um, and skills at the center of this. How do organizations actually be structured and are driving for success? Um, the shift we're really seeing, because ultimately, you know, validating skills definitely has a performance component to it. But more importantly, today I'm finding it that it's actually about how to put those skills in the right place. Um, And the biggest shift we're seeing is organizations, first of all, are sort of rewiring to the idea of an always on construct. So, change management is not necessarily a construct anymore. It's more about adoption readiness because it's constant, always on. And then the organizations are sort of rewiring to that construct. And the rewiring is really around less departments and organizations construct, but more about organizations rewiring to product solutions, customer segments, real-time capacity management. And you need to be able to use skills to be able to do that. That's got to be the currency.
And so because you've moved a lot into job architecture, and I think it'd be useful maybe to talk through why you've combined job architecture with OD and how that relates to this as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time for that.
Yes.
We see that job architecture in organizations is way too complex. I mean, that's the simplest way of doing it. It needs to be much more fluid, and the ability to be able to move at pace with that job architecture. Again, ultimately, organizations used to see their competitive advantage around their ability to drive organizations through, I would say, decision rights at the top of the house and organization strategies. Now their competitive advantage is around capacity assembly. So how can they really sense, manage, and deploy resources dramatically, quickly at the pace of need, and then secondly around decision rights when they're in that form, that capacity, how do they drive decision rights at the point of need, and enable that through obviously technology to make insights and then make those decisions. So when you think about how that shifts job architecture, it really is a sort of fundamental shift to be able to enable to do that. You either rewire to the point I just said, or ultimately, which is the most challenging, you become wireless. And your organization is built on skills, and your job architecture is really around the capabilities rather than the wires that hold them together. Challenging objective, but we are seeing organizations do that. I mean, it sounds so out there, but think about how Amazon works and how their pure focus is to get a package to you within a day. The only way they can do that is completely make their organization wireless about product needs. So there is happening. It's just it's challenging for some of our more orthodox organizations.
Yeah. And that leads to that all these practices has to be in the context of what the organization is driving for. If the
Correct.
industry is like insurance, which takes 10 years to change their product,
So
then it
true.
is very difficult for them to get wireless. But if it is Amazon and if it is like, 10 minutes overnight deliveries and all of those things, they have to do it very wireless. So I love that analogy actually that you gave. And that also brings me that the job architecture has to be very much aligned with the skills then.
Without doubt. You're
So
absolutely right.
absolutely, that also shifts that previously the job architecture was extremely focused on work and processes, which is right thing to do, but that makes the organization wired. But if we want to make it wireless, it has to be very much skill based. And
Correct.
where do you see the organizations have the biggest challenges in getting that, other than the legacy mindset that you already mentioned? Where do
Yeah.
organizations
I mean,
struggle? Basically, even if they want to do it, where do they struggle?
yeah. I mean, I think the simplification of job architecture is a key piece of it. I do think there's a technology value case here as well, though. In the sort of shift for leaders thinking about technology investments that are sort of traditional around driving impact for ROI to that investment rather than overall organizational value. So the other sort of shift, if you're going to go sort of the wireless angle and again going skill based, breaking apart job architecture, is you need to be able to have a business case for your technology investments that's essentially around the holistic value of what you're driving, rather than that specific technology. So ultimately, the business case for tech has to be human performance and outcomes, rather than maybe whatever widget you might think that technology is moving forward. And it's a broader governance and broader metrics. So that's probably an inhibitor as well. I think the last piece in the story of this is when we think about capacity management, job architecture, sort of tipping point. I've said it before, but the decision rights of the organization has to go much further down the organization. The simplistic example of that is we wrote in our human capital trends report last year, or even 2 years ago, I think it was, an example of a manufacturing plant and a worker, and it was about the worker-employee relationship around the worker on a factory line being empowered to make an observation about a fault in that line and then bring it up to the organization leadership and strategize around a solution, being brought into the conversation about a solution and working with leadership to make that decision. In today's world, the difference is that factory worker probably has the insights and the technology to actually make that change. They don't have to go up, and they have the authority to do that. That's the difference. And I think we're seeing that shift around decision rights.
So with decision rights, and that really gets down to the fundamentals of org design as well, which is who's approving what decision, who's responsible for what decision. And so when you're doing that and you're trying to push it down further within the job architecture, are you finding that clients, because that can often be a very political process as well.
For sure.
So how are you navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our clients are experimenting, right? I mean, because it's going to, it does come back to a bit of a cultural mindset shift around authority, and something that we're noodling with, with our next human capital trends. Our human capital trends just came out a few months ago for 2025, but the world never stops, so we're strategizing around 2026 already. And we're actually noodling on a topic around who's the boss in organizations as we think about this strategy. It's connected to the end of function, right? I think you may have seen recently Moderna merged their HR and tech function. So functions are starting to fall and collapse a little bit. So functions are falling. Leadership has a different role. Decisions rights are changing. And then organizations are saying, what is the role of the manager in all of this? So it's really an interesting time to say who's actually the boss of the organization. And I think what we're seeing in all of this conversation is clients are going to have to get much more comfortable with risk. This is why experimentation, to your point, how a client's managing it, they're giving different workforces, and it's usually by segment of workforce, a frontline or a tech or a finance. Try it out with that different organization or workforce, and see the impacts and understand the risk tolerance and have different measures for success.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I don't know if you've read any of my books, but in it I lay out a framework of what is the risk of a decision, and what is what is the impact of getting it wrong, and what is the frequency of making the decision. And it's only if it's an infrequent decision that has a huge impact, irreversible impact of getting it wrong.
Right.
Do you want to go up and have it done at a higher level? Because the bureaucracy is worth it, because the coordination and dealing with that and the one-off nature of that risk. Whereas if it could be a high impact, irreversible, but if it's happening a lot, you can have processes and mechanisms for doing it, and therefore rules, and it can be pushed down. And if it's irreversible, you can reverse it, etc. Then you can push it down further. And I think it's just thinking about as you're doing, I call it the RAD, who's responsible, who's approving, and who's doing, as opposed to RACI. So when you're doing the design of the RAD, which links into job architecture, it's actually thinking about the nature of those decisions.
Yeah.
And then pushing as many down as possible.
You just I love the frequency of the decision. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. That's a really important lens and very actionable, right?
Yeah.
You can strategize and build approaches based upon that metric, right? How often is this decision made?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll steal that from you. Appreciate it.
with total pleasure. And also the, having when you're doing the design, having the approval being clear and counting the number of approvers. So, because if you've got more than one approver, you've got coordination, and that's time and effort. You have to get two people in a room. That's two people to lobby. So as soon as there's more than two, and so my question is, if you can count those, where do you need more than two?
Yeah.
And you get to three, then you're really adding. It becomes exponential, right? Like coordinating three people's diaries and time and everything else in mind space is dramatically harder than even two, right? It becomes.
Yeah, and I think that approval structure and does go back to job architecture, and I think we've seen this a couple of conversations with clients around, what is the strategy for job architecture, and then what are the proof points and testing points of it breaking. And your example is exactly one of those. Like if we're too slow to decisions and there's different approval rights, then potentially our structure and architecture is off, right, and suboptimal to what we're trying to drive towards. I think the other interesting angle on this topic, Rupert, to pivot a little bit, but on the same angle, is a discussion I've been having recently with a couple of clients around their rights and ability to build agents and an agentic workforce. I don't know if you've tried, but it's actually not that hard to build a basic agent. Obviously, at the simplest one, it's like a self-service customer agent that can answer questions. It can go higher and higher, but not that challenging. But when organizations want to design an agent for their organization and want to make some decision rights about what that agent is the investment worth putting it in, especially if it's an enterprise solution. The detail around requirements, workflow, impact for value, how it interacts with workforce, what's the work composition of it, is quite fascinating how detailed organizations get to in that process. And when you compare that to how organizations are writing a job description and for an individual and then throwing them in the organization, it's quite different. And I think we've got to figure out how those things become. I actually don't mind thinking about workflow and value for a job. Actually, it's actually better than probably a job description in the old sense of words. So we've got to find a happy medium between those two, because humans and machines are consistently going to be working together.
I think the job descriptions for me is fascinating because all too often it's written for a point in time where I'm trying to recruit someone, so for talent acquisition. And so where do people start with the job description, copy and paste from another one and make slight amendments so you can recruit just in time at the last minute. And therefore, what are the responsibilities? What are the skills? Well, you're not really thinking about it properly. And most job descriptions are pretty poor, as opposed to having the org design practitioner actually do it and specify what are the skills that are going to make this role highly effective. And one of the things where I've done it with some clients, Michael, is if I look at the role, what makes certain people hyper successful in this role?
Right.
And what is it about those that are the most successful? What is it about them that makes them so successful? And can we think and analyze that and then build the skills required around that, as opposed to which then gets to how is it that they do the work so effectively, et cetera, because it is connected to the work, but it's also connected to the outcomes you want to achieve. And can you think about that and analyze that? So it's quite an analytical process, because what the other risk is just a sort of a shooting in the dark with a machine gun, and all of a sudden you have like 20 skills, because it's always easier to add more and more and more. And so the question is, now what are the critical 4 or 5 that really make the difference in terms of the outcomes in that role? And and that's a really important thought process. And then when you're looking internally first, who's got those? And it's
Right.
amazing where you can find this. That it feeds into the whole talent mobility, and also the talent marketplace piece, because that data then becomes free for that. And then if you have to go external to recruit, at least you can start thinking about these are the skills that are really needed to be successful here. And all too often in job descriptions, because they're copying and pasting, they're just bland competencies and skills that just sort of could be for anyone. They're not really specific.
Yeah.
And then how you assess them is also not really clear in terms of that recruitment talent
Without a doubt.
process. So the whole thing
Yeah.
is kind
I
of
totally
flawed,
agree.
really. So it's that connecting the whole piece together, really, and just being thoughtful. It's interesting you're talking about agents. I've got a friend, a personal friend in London who is responsible for heart surgery at a leading
Mm.
hospital, and he has to make decisions about when a heart comes available, who gets that heart,
Wow.
and who lives and who might not live, right? And there's so much risk, because if you give the heart and it doesn't work, it's
Yeah.
life and death sort of on many different dimensions, and often you have to make the decision quite quickly. And so I've been chatting with him about, can you? It's augmented, so he should always make the final decision, but it'd be helpful, because often this is made like when there's an accident or something and the heart's coming in, so it could be 3 a.m. You wake up and you've got to make a decision in sort of half an hour, and all the data's in his head, and he's obviously an incredibly bright human being, but he's a human being. So what can you have that could help you? And
Right.
imagine you have a buddy, which is an agent, and the buddy says, I think we should do X, and you think we should do. If you both think we should do X, it should give confidence independently. But if you think we should do Y and the agent thinks we should do X, that's all. Who's made the mistake here? Let me think again. Still my
Right.
decision, but it's an aide moi. And going back to earlier about what is
Yeah.
the impact of getting it wrong, having that augmentation is extremely helpful and efficient.
I love that, and the angle that conversation is taking is less that the agent is informing you. It's more that they're a sounding board. They're
Yeah,
a, as you say, a partner in. If we came up to just a different decision, then let's look at it again, right?
yeah,
And it really is a partner then, right? Rather
yeah,
than just sort of an employee or a
yeah,
subordinate, right?
yeah,
Interesting. I love that.
yeah. And a totally impartial partner, right? It's
Right.
it's not dealing with sleep fatigue. It's not dealing with emotions, or
It's not
one
going to
one
get upset
family.
with you if you decide the other thing, right?
I'm more,
So,
I might have a subconscious bias for one family over another for whatever reason, or one
right.
child, right? And I don't know that I have that, but the agent says, well, X, or I might just not have thought about something. So it's exactly, it's that partner, it's that checking, and I think if we move in that direction, that can only be a positive. If we move in the direction of being over reliant, the risk
Yeah.
being, oh, we just follow what the agent says, and we don't have, at the end of the day, the decision has to be with a human, right? So that's the risk, I think.
And interesting enough, it's a good example because I've been talking about this with clients too around this job description, and then you to your point around performance and year end. Like in that example, that agent ultimately will be it will tracking its first recommendation or second or third to the success of that heart will be binary, and we'll be comfortable with it. We'll be like, well, look, obviously this was built wrong. It's not effective because its first suggestion said this, and this, and actually when we played it out, they were wrong decisions. We're going to have to rebuild it. We don't do that with our workforce, right? your friend, if he makes 4 or 5 decisions, we're like, oh, maybe we need to reskill him or this or whatever, or maybe didn't get the right thing, maybe he had a bad day, and we're going to have to get a little bit more with our workforce, like we are with our technology.
Yeah, yeah, and in his case, he's one of only a few people in the UK that can do what he can do. I mean,
Yeah,
getting the
I'm
skill set
sure.
even get to that point is, and we think about the level of skills that a lot of people have because Adam Smith and specialization, we're becoming so more specialized, and so much more. And if I look at London, for instance, the legal field in London is so much more specialized. Like, I'm from New Zealand. I've got a couple of brothers who are lawyers in New Zealand, and they're way more generalist. And they touch on way more. So as we grow and scale and bigger economies, you become more and more focused. We miss that capability to cut across and see across things. Goodness, I think we're probably digressing a bit, Michael, but it's
well,
certainly
no,
interesting.
I actually think the conversation we're having as well, we're seeing a little bit, just to keep a thread there. There's a big shift in the marketplace for organizations to think about their build, operate, transfer, captives, GCC market. So we're seeing a lot of organizations, thinking, okay, how do I take X to, it could be your tech department, it could be your finance, it could just be starting a new business line. How do I give that to another organization, consultants like us or otherwise, and have them, really transform it with AI, with the different delivery pools, operate differently, make it more efficient, and then pass it back. The shift we're seeing a little bit is in that it's not just a transfer; it's a little more of a blend. So it's almost like build, operate, blend, transfer with AI. And that blend aspect around how are we optimizing AI and workforce to drive outcomes together, and sort of that blend element is the key for success in those bot deals. We're seeing it more and more and more, especially as you have to sign up for a certain percentage of savings and costs, etc. So your micro example with your friend is playing out so much in organization strategies, because these GCC setups are becoming the norm today in how organizations are creating sort of net new value.
Yeah. God, we could keep on going, but unfortunately, time is against us. Just by way of wrapping up, and thanks so much. It's been really interesting conversation, and really heartwarming that you're pushing the connection from org design to job architecture and actually getting people to think about that properly, because that's been sorting this for a very long time and putting
Very
skills
much
at the
so.
center. So no, thank you for that. So just in terms of wrapping up, one tool that you think people could practically just leverage straight away in their day-to-day drives, for our listeners, and one trap, word to the wise, some of your gray hairs, if you'd think through 20 years ago, what do I wish I would not have done or could have avoided?
I mean, I think tool-wise, any Gen AI technology, I'm enjoying using Copilot personally right now, but frankly, I just feel like you've got to be able to, the speed and efficiency we can use through our technologies. So I would go in that phase, and for me, it's Copilot right now. I think trap, our conversation, we've covered a few different traps. I think the biggest trap I'm seeing is for organizations to not move at pace and be putting risk at the center of their organization strategies. Biggest trap.
Risk getting in the way of progress.
Yeah.
And speed. Yeah. The inertia of the big corporate.
Totally.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's I think in that you talked a lot about culture at the beginning. That's a cultural thing.
For sure.
Your ability, and going back to the point about decision making, if the impact is maybe significant but reversible, you learn by just trying and iterating. And so culturally, how do you deal with failure, and making mistakes? Is that a learning,
Totally
or is
right.
that bad?
And for every industry, I know we talked earlier about some industries potentially not revolutionizing like insurance in the past, but frankly, if even insurance companies aren't adopting technology at the pace of change right now, they're going to be disrupted.
Yeah.
So I think every organization has to move. Yeah, sure, it's more hyper utilized in some, but every organization needs to be thinking about this strategy.
Yeah, everyone's going to be disrupted if you don't. So Michael, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and for all the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the conversation.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.